The wind cut low across the graveyard, dragging a whisper of sand over the crooked stones. Caleb Hart knelt at the foot of a grave so worn with time the name had nearly vanished, but he didn't need the letters to know whose bones lay under the dry earth. Anna. His hat sat low over his brow, shielding his eyes from the hard sun, but the heat did little to warm the cold knot in his chest. He pressed his palm flat against the cracked wood of the marker, rough as unspoken promises. "I'm still here," he muttered, the words rasping out like sand through a sieve. "Still making a mess of it." Behind him, Dry Creek baked under the noon sun, a scattering of warped buildings and crooked streets that hadn't seen rain in 6 months. The town was dying, same as everything else out here, and Caleb could feel it in his bones, the slow decay of things left too long under the weight of their own sorrow. He stood, boots grinding into the brittle grass, and turned toward the town. Every step felt heavier than the last. At the general store, Old Man Perkins leaned against a barrel, whittling nothing in particular. His knife paused as Caleb passed, but he said nothing. They all knew him, Caleb Hart, the man who once had a thriving ranch, a pretty wife, and a future carved from sweat and good fortune. Now he was just another broken soul, hanging on because he didn't know what else to do. The saloon doors slapped against their frames as Caleb crossed the street. A trio of roughnecks lounged outside, their laughter sharp as glass. One of them, Billy Croft, tipped his hat with a mock flourish. "Mornin', widower," Billy called, voice dripping with a kind of mean humor that came easy to small men in forgotten towns. Caleb didn't look up, didn't slow. He just walked, each step grinding the dust deeper into his worn boots. At the blacksmith's, a knot of townsfolk had gathered, murmuring low like a swarm of locusts. Caleb caught scraps of their talk, words like, "damn shame," and, "about time." Curiosity itched at the edge of his mind, but he pushed it down. He had chores to do, fences to mend, cattle to count that no longer answered when he called. But then he heard a name that stopped him cold, Mabel Whitlock. He turned, slow as molasses, and squinted at the knot of faces. "Left her for dead, they did," Perkins said, shaking his head. "Town council voted last night. Stripped her land, her claim. Said she's too old, can't work it no more. Not worth the trouble." "Old which should have died years ago," Billy chimed in. "Ain't no use in feeding ghosts." Laughter rippled through the crowd, mean and shallow. Caleb felt something tighten in his gut. Mabel Whitlock. He remembered her, though just barely. The old woman lived on the edge of the desert in a shack the wind threatened to carry off every spring. She hadn't set foot in town in years. Folks said she talked to herself, claimed she'd seen things out in the desert, things best left buried. They called her crazy, a relic from a time even the West wanted to forget. But she was still a human being. He turned back toward the livery, hands balling into fists. The anger wasn't clean, it was messy, tangled up with his own guilt, his own failures. Maybe that's why it burns so hot. He saddled his mare, a rangy sorrel with one bad leg, and swung up into the creaking saddle. He didn't stop to pack supplies, didn't even bother to tell anyone where he was going. He just pointed his horse toward the desert and kicked her into a slow, limping trot. The sun fell lower as he rode, turning the sky a bruised purple. Dust rose from the cracked earth in lazy spirals, and the heat clung to him like a second skin. His canteen bumped against his hip, half empty, but he didn't think about thirst, only about the woman left to die because she didn't fit neatly into the town's idea of useful. By the time he spotted the shack, night was bleeding into the sky. It huddled against a dune like a wounded animal, one corner caved in, the roof patched with old tarps and scrap tin. Smoke curled from a crooked stovepipe, a thin, stubborn thread. He reined in and dismounted stiffly. His shoulder throbbed from an old injury he never bothered fixing, but he ignored it and trudged the last few yards on foot. The door hung ajar, its hinges groaning with every breath of wind. Caleb hesitated on the threshold, then rapped his knuckles against the frame. A voice like rusted wire snapped from inside. "Get on, if you're here to gawk." Caleb pushed the door open and stepped into the gloom. Mabel Whitlock sat by a crooked stove, wrapped in a patchwork quilt. Her hair was a wild halo of white, her face a craggy map of years and sorrows. Her eyes, though, sharp and bright as shattered glass, pinned him to the spot. "You look like hell warmed over," she said. Caleb almost smiled. "Almost." "I came to talk," he said. She snorted, a dry, humorless sound. "Ain't had visitors in 7 years. Don't need one now. You need a place to go." Her eyes narrowed. "You offering pity, heart?" "No," he shook his head, dust cascading from the brim of his hat. "Offering a deal." Mabel leaned forward, quilts sliding from her bony shoulders. "Ain't got nothing you want, boy." Caleb met her gaze, steady as he could manage. "Neither do I." For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the stove. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing. Finally, Mabel pushed herself upright, leaning on a crooked cane. "Well," she said, voice softer but no less sharp, "you better come inside proper then. No sense letting the cold eat us both." He stepped fully into the shack and let the door slam shut behind him. The place smelled of smoke, dust, and stubbornness. An old shotgun rested by the door. A tattered Bible lay open on the table, pages fluttering in the draft. Mabel poured 2 cups of something that might once have been coffee and set one in front of him with a clink. "Let's hear it then," she said, settling back into her chair. Caleb wrapped his hands around the cup, feeling the heat seep into his bones. He chose his words carefully, knowing once spoken, there'd be no taking them back. "I can't run Heart's End alone anymore. Land's gone, fences are down. Town's ready to pick it clean soon as I give up the ghost." He paused, feeling the weight of it all settle on his shoulders. "I figure maybe 2 folks, broken clean through, might still have a fighting chance." Mabel stared at him, her eyes unreadable. "You asking me to marry you?" The absurdity of it hit him then, and for the first time in a long time, Caleb laughed, a dry, ragged sound pulled straight from his hollow chest. "Yeah," he said. "Yes, I am." Mabel's mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile. She sipped her coffee, staring at him over the rim. "Boy," she said, "you're either the dumbest man this side of the Rockies or the last decent one. Could be both." They sat in silence after that, the kind that wasn't awkward but heavy with possibility. Outside, the wind died down, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Mabel set her cup down with a decisive thump. "Ain't got no use for romance, mind you." "Neither do I," Caleb said. "Ain't got no dowry. Ain't got no land. Ain't got nothing but a bad back and a mean disposition." Caleb tipped his hat back and looked her square in the eye. "Sounds like just what I need." The old woman barked a laugh then, harsh and free. Well then, Heart, she said, extending one gnarled hand. Let's be fools together. He took her hand, rough against his calloused palm, and they shook on it. Not lovers, not dreamers. Survivors. Outside, the last light of day bled out behind the hills, leaving only darkness and stars and a future neither of them had dared imagine. In the hills, unseen by either, a shadow watched with eyes full of hunger. They married at dawn, with the desert wind as their only witness. No preacher, no church, no ring, just Caleb, Mabel, and the wide, indifferent sky stretching out overhead. Caleb tied a piece of rawhide around Mabel's thin wrist like a bracelet, and she touched his calloused hand with surprising gentleness. They spoke no vows. In a place like Dry Creek, a word given was enough. By mid-morning, they were riding back to Heart's End, a ranch in name only, a battered house and 2 outbuildings, a windmill that groaned with every turn. Caleb watched Mabel out of the corner of his eye as they rode. She sat straight in the saddle despite her years, her gaze steady on the horizon. "You sure you can handle it?" he asked after a while, nodding toward the broken fence lines and thirsty fields that waited for them. Mabel gave a low grunt. "Boy, I handled worse than this when you were still learning to piss straight." Caleb chuckled, the sound rough in his throat. He hadn't realized how much he missed someone talking back. When they reached the ranch house, Mabel slid off her horse with a grunt and surveyed the property like a general inspecting a battlefield. "Livestock?" she asked, eyes sharp. 2 cows, a half-blind mule, and a chicken meaner than a rattlesnake's spit. Mabel snorted. "We'll manage." She marched up the steps to the house, cane clicking against the weather-beaten boards, and Caleb followed, feeling something unfamiliar start to stir in his chest. Not hope, not yet, but something like it, a slow, tentative awakening. Inside, the house smelled of dust, old wood, and loneliness. Caleb had stopped caring about cleaning years ago. There were dishes left to dry and sinks filled with cracked mud, a fireplace half-choked with ash, furniture draped in old sheets. Mabel stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking it all in. Then she set her jaw and rolled up the sleeves of her battered shirt. "First things first," she said. "This place smells like dead dreams. Open the damn windows." They worked side by side until their bodies ached. Mabel tore through the house like a storm, sweeping out dust, beating rugs, scrubbing soot from the hearth. Caleb mended a broken shutter, patched the sagging porch steps, and dug out the root cellar he hadn't touched since Anna died. There were no soft words between them, no easy smiles, only the scrape of effort, the grunt of exertion, the rhythm of 2 stubborn souls refusing to give up. By nightfall, the house felt lighter somehow, as if their labor had scraped away not just dirt, but grief. Caleb sat by the fire, cradling a chipped mug of coffee. Mabel lowered herself carefully into the chair opposite him, a wet cloth tied around her hair to keep the dust out. For a time, they just sat, listening to the fire crackle, the old house settling around them like an aging dog. Then Mabel spoke, her voice low and steady. "You think you're the only one who's lost something, Heart?" Caleb looked at her, really looked, the deep lines etched into her face, the tired set of her shoulders, the way her hands never quite stopped moving even when resting. "No," he said quietly. "I reckon grief's the only thing left in plenty around here." She nodded, staring into the flames. "Had a boy once. Jesse. Smart as a whip, mouth full of dreams. Rode off to fight in the war and never rode back." The fire popped, sending a thin wisp of ash into the air. "I'm sorry," Caleb said, and meant it. Mabel shrugged, but the motion was tight, brittle. "We all carry graves inside us, Hart. Some just get heavier than others." Caleb sipped his coffee, the bitterness grounding him. "Why stay out here all this time?" he asked. Mabel's lips twisted into something almost like a smile. "Out here, my ghost got room to breathe." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Caleb felt the weight of the day settle into his bones, but beneath it, a stubborn flicker of something warmer, something stronger. The next morning, they set to work on the ranch. Fences first. Caleb hammered posts back into the ground while Mabel steadied them with surprising strength. They worked without speaking much, falling into an easy rhythm broken only by Mabel's sharp cursing whenever the mule wandered into the wrong field. Midway through the morning, Billy Croft and two of his cronies rode up, dust rising from their horses like smoke. Well, Billy drawled, swinging down from his saddle. "Ain't this a sweet little setup? Old Man Hart and the town witch, playin' house." His friends laughed, the sound grating. Caleb straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. His fists itched, but he kept them at his sides. "Don't recall inviting you out here, Billy." Billy sauntered closer, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Just thought we'd pay respects to the newlyweds." "Mighty generous of you, Hart, takin' in charity cases." Mabel leaned on her cane, her eyes like twin nails. "You boys got somewhere else to be?" she asked, voice sharp as a whip crack. Billy sneered. "Place like this ain't worth saving. You'll both be dead or gone by winter." Caleb stepped forward, slow and deliberate, closing the distance until only inches separated them. "This land's mine," he said, voice low and steady. "And anyone who tries to take it, they'll find I ain't near as broken as they think." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Billy chuckled and backed off, spitting into the dirt. "Suit yourself," he said. "See you round, Hart." They rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving the ranch silent but for the sigh of the wind. Mabel clucked her tongue. "Idiots," she said. Caleb watched the dust settle, feeling something coil tight in his gut. Trouble wasn't done with them yet. He could smell it on the air, taste it in the grit on his tongue. That night, as they ate beans and cornbread by firelight, Mabel said, "You know they'll come back." Caleb nodded. "They'll come when they think we're weakest." Mabel smiled, a fierce, grim thing. "Well," she said, "they're in for a surprise." They spent the next day shoring up defenses. Caleb fixed the barn doors, reinforced the windows. Mabel taught him how to rig crude alarms with tripwires and tin cans, tricks she claimed she'd learned fighting off claim jumpers decades ago. Between the chores and the preparations, something began to grow between them, a partnership born not of romance, but of grit and stubborn will. Mabel never softened, never played the part of doting wife. She cursed like a miner, argued like a lawyer, and worked like a mule. Caleb found he preferred it that way. He wasn't looking for comfort, he was looking for someone who understood that survival was a kind of love, too. One evening, as they sat under the stars, Mabel pulled a battered harmonica from her pocket and played a tune so mournful it made Caleb's chest ache. When she finished, he said, "You're a hard woman, Mabel Whitlock." She snorted. "Takes a hard woman to survive a soft world gone sour." The fire crackled between them, casting their faces in shifting light. Caleb stared into the flames and realized with a jolt of wonder that for the first time in years, he wasn't just enduring each day. He was living it. Outside the circle of light, beyond the edges of safety, danger stirred, gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. But for now, they had a home, a fragile peace, and they would defend it with everything they had left. The attack came 3 nights later, under a sickle moon and a sky smeared with blood-colored clouds. Caleb had just doused the lanterns when he heard the first footstep crunch against the gravel outside. He froze, heart hammering. Beside him, Mabel cocked her head like a hound. Trouble. Without a word, she slipped the old shotgun into his hands and grabbed the pistol from the mantel. Another crunch, then another. Shadows pulled around the porch steps. Caleb sucked in a slow breath, his palm sweating against the gunstock. "Wait," Mabel whispered. "Wait till you see the whites of their teeth." The door rattled once, twice, then burst inward with a crash. 3 men rushed in, silhouetted by the flickering firelight. Caleb pulled the trigger, the shotgun bucking against his shoulder. One of the intruders screamed and dropped, clutching his leg. The others swore and fanned out, knives flashing. Mabel didn't hesitate. She fired at the ceiling to disorient them, then swung her cane in a wide arc, catching one square across the jaw. The man stumbled, dazed. Caleb charged him, ramming the shotgun stock into his gut. Outside, horses whinnied and bootsteps thundered. More were coming. Back to the pantry. Mabel barked, already moving. Caleb hauled the pantry door shut just as gunfire erupted from outside, bullets chewing into the walls like angry hornets. They barricaded themselves behind sacks of grain and rusted tools, listening to the chaos unfold. "We can't hold them forever," Caleb muttered, checking the shells in his shotgun. Only 3 left. Mabel's eyes gleamed in the dim light, sharp and ferocious. Long enough. Footsteps thudded down the hall. Someone tried the pantry door, found it jammed, and cursed. Another blast of gunfire tore a hole in the boards, inches from Caleb's head. He gritted his teeth, heart pounding like a drumbeat. There was no cavalry coming, no sheriff, no neighbors willing to lift a hand for the broken cowboy and the town pariah. It was just them. A heavy body slammed into the door again, splintering it. Caleb raised his shotgun, but Mabel shook her head. "Save your shot," she whispered. The third slam shattered the door completely. A man lunged through, swinging a crowbar. Caleb ducked low and fired from the hip. The blast knocked the attacker backward in a spray of dust and blood. Caleb fumbled for another shell, but Mabel was already moving, firing the pistol with grim precision. The second man dropped with a cry. For a breathless moment, there was silence. Then the third man, a burly figure with a battered hat and a scar twisting across his mouth, stepped through the smoke. Billy Croft. He leveled a revolver at them, lip curled in a sneer. "Well, ain't this a picture," he drawled. "2 relics playing soldier." Caleb stepped forward, blocking Mabel with his body. "This ain't your land, Billy." Billy chuckled, low and mean. "It ain't yours either. It belongs to whoever's strong enough to take it." The gun in his hand twitched. Mabel didn't wait. She hurled her empty pistol like a thrown stone, striking Billy's wrist. The shot went wide, burying itself harmlessly in the ceiling. Caleb sprang forward, driving his shoulder into Billy's gut. They hit the floor hard, grappling, fists flying. Billy was bigger, meaner, fueled by rage. Caleb fought with desperation, with the memory of Anna and the memory of days too bitter to count. Blows landed, hot and wet. Blood spattered the dusty floorboards. Billy pulled a knife, the blade catching the firelight in a wicked gleam. Mabel moved with the speed of a rattlesnake, slamming her cane down on Billy's wrist with a sickening crack. The knife clattered away. Caleb seized the opening, driving his fist into Billy's jaw with all the strength he had left. Billy slumped, unconscious. Panting, Caleb staggered back, wiping blood from his mouth. Mabel stood over Billy's crumpled form, chest heaving. "What now?" Caleb rasped. Mabel's face was hard as stone. "We bury the bastards in their own failure." In the bleak light of dawn, they tied Billy and the other attackers to their horses and sent them riding back toward town, battered and broken, a message clear as thunder: Heart's End would not fall. Caleb watched them disappear over the horizon, a fierce pride burning in his gut. For the first time in years, he realized he wasn't just surviving. He was fighting. They spent the day repairing the damage. Mabel stitched Caleb's torn brow with ruthless efficiency, muttering curses under her breath the whole time. "Next time," she said, tying off the last knot, "you duck faster." Caleb grinned through the pain. "Yes, ma'am." As the sun set, painting the sky in gold and crimson, they stood side by side on the porch, surveying their battered but unbroken homestead. Mabel sipped a cup of coffee, grimacing at the taste. "We'll have to trade for better beans," she said. Caleb chuckled. "We'll manage." A comfortable silence stretched between them, filled only by the creak of the windmill and the distant lowing of the cows. Mabel turned to him, her face serious. "They'll come back, Hart. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week. But men like Croft don't let go easy." Caleb nodded, the weight of her words settling heavy in his chest. "I know." She fixed him with a hard stare. "You ready for that?" Caleb thought of Anna's grave, of the years he'd wasted letting sorrow eat him alive. He thought of Mabel, fierce and stubborn, refusing to lie down and die just because the world told her to. He thought of Heart's End, the dust, the blood, the brittle hope curling stubbornly in the dry earth. "I'm ready," he said. Mabel's mouth twitched into a rare, approving smile. "Good." The stars came out, sharp and brilliant in the cold sky. Together, they sat on the porch, weapons within easy reach, shoulders brushing, two broken souls stitched together by necessity, defiance, and a sliver of something almost like faith. Inside, the fire burned low but steady. Outside, the wild whispered its threats, and somewhere beyond the hills, the next storm gathered strength. But tonight, Heart's End still stood. And so did they. Spring came late to Heart's End, as if the land itself had forgotten how to hope. But when it came, it unfurled in stubborn bursts, wildflowers clawing up through the dry soil, green shoots piercing the battered earth like spears. Caleb stood at the edge of the pasture, hat in hand, watching a newborn calf wobble on unsteady legs. The sun beat down, harsh and brilliant, gilding the land with a beauty so fierce it almost hurt to look at. Mabel hobbled up beside him, squinting against the glare. "Well," she said, voice rough with something close to wonder, "damned if it ain't growing." Caleb smiled, slow and genuine. "So are we." The ranch had changed. They had changed. Word of Billy Croft's humiliating defeat had spread like wildfire. Other ranchers, long silent, began stopping by Heart's End, some offering fence posts, others trading supplies, a few just tipping their hats in silent respect. It wasn't friendship yet, but it was a start. Mabel had taken over the root cellar, stocking it with jars of preserves, bolts of cloth, even a battered photograph she'd salvaged from a junk wagon. At night, scratchy music floated up from the house, blending with the sigh of the wind. Caleb rebuilt the barn with new lumber, sturdy and strong. He mended fences, planted rows of corn and beans, repaired the battered windmill. Each nail he hammered, each seed he sowed, stitched him closer to the life he'd thought forever lost. One evening, as the sun melted into a sea of gold and crimson, a rider appeared on the ridge. Caleb's body tensed, hand drifting to the rifle resting against the porch. Mabel saw the movement and shook her head. Wait. The rider was young, barely more than a boy, with a dust-covered satchel slung over one shoulder. He rode down slow, cautious, hands visible. Caleb stepped forward, squinting. The boy pulled up, nervous. "Name's Jesse Whitlock," he said, voice cracking slightly. "Looking for Mabel Whitlock. She here?" Mabel's cane slipped from her hand, clattering against the porch. For a moment, she just stood there, frozen. Then she moved faster than Caleb would have thought possible, crossing the yard with long, limping strides. She stopped before the boy, staring up at him like she was afraid he might vanish if she blinked. "My Jesse's dead," she said hoarsely. The boy dismounted slowly, tears already tracking through the dust on his cheeks. "No, ma'am," he said, voice breaking. "I'm his son." Mabel swayed. Caleb caught her elbow, steadying her. "My pa," the boy continued, fumbling in the satchel, "he wrote this before he passed. Told me if I ever needed a place, to find you." He pulled out a crumpled letter, held it out with shaking hands. Mabel took it, staring down at the worn paper like it was a holy relic. Silence stretched, deep and reverent. Finally, she looked up, eyes blazing. "You got a name, boy?" "Matthew, ma'am. Matthew Whitlock." Mabel nodded, slow and deliberate. "Well, Matthew Whitlock," she said, voice steady now, "looks like you found your place." Caleb watched them, a lump thickening in his throat. He felt it then, the deep, bone-deep understanding that loss didn't have to be the end. Sometimes, if you were stubborn enough, if you fought hard enough, something new could bloom in the ruins. Matthew settled into the ranch like he'd been born to it, full of energy and questions. He helped mend the fences, fed the stock, even coaxed the mean old chicken into tolerating his presence. In him, Caleb saw echoes of his own lost son, a boy who might have grown into a man if fate had been kinder. And in Mabel, he saw a fierce kind of joy slowly return, brittle at first but growing stronger by the day. They weren't a perfect family, far from it. They bickered, they cursed, they stumbled over old wounds and new misunderstandings. But they endured. Summer burned over the land, baking the fields to hard clay, testing their resolve. Storms tore through the ranch, ripping at fences and scattering tools across the yard. Each time, they rebuilt. Each time, they stood a little taller. The final test came on a sweltering August night. Billy Croft returned, not with a gang, but with a lawyer's letter and a smug smile. "You're trespassing," Billy said, tossing the letter at Caleb's boots. "Turns out your deed's invalid. This land's mine by rights now." Caleb didn't bend down to pick it up. He simply stared at Billy, a quiet, dangerous calm settling over him. Mabel stepped forward, cane tapping against the porch boards. "This land ain't yours, Billy," she said. Billy sneered. "You old witch got no say in it. The law's on my side." Caleb's voice was soft, deadly. "You want this land so bad, Billy, you'll have to take it with your own 2 hands." For a heartbeat, Billy hesitated. He wasn't a stupid man. He saw the way Caleb stood, the quiet readiness in Matthew's stance, the shotgun leaning, casual and loaded, by the door. Billy spat into the dirt, hate burning in his eyes. "This ain't over, Hart." "No," Caleb agreed. "It's just beginning." Billy mounted his horse and rode off into the darkness, a hollow man clinging to dying power. Caleb picked up the letter, glanced at it, and smiled. Sloppy work, too. The law would chew Billy up and spit him out soon enough. The next morning, Caleb, Mabel, and Matthew rode into town together, heads high, eyes steady. They walked into the courthouse, filed the new deed Mabel had hidden away years ago, a deed now notarized, official, unbreakable. Hart's End was theirs. Truly, finally, theirs. The sun shone down as they rode home, the dust rising in golden plumes around them. At the crest of the final hill, Caleb reined in and looked down at the ranch. The house stood proud, windows glinting. The barn, freshly painted, gleamed against the dry fields. The windmill turned, slow and steady in the breeze, singing a song of survival. Mabel rode up beside him, a faint smile tugging at her weathered face. "Well," she said, "reckon we done it." Caleb nodded, emotion swelling too big for words. He looked at Matthew, riding ahead, full of life and stubborn promise. He looked at Mabel, scarred and strong, a testament to the kind of courage that refused to die. He looked at Hart's End, blooming like a miracle in the dust. And he knew, in the deepest marrow of his bones, that this was what Anna would have wanted. Not despair, not surrender, but life, messy, painful, beautiful life. He touched the brim of his hat in a silent salute to the heavens. "Thank you," he whispered, the words snatched away by the wind. They rode down into the valley together, a family forged in loss and reborn in the stubborn green of hope. The dust of yesterday had settled, and from it, something fierce and unbreakable had grown.